welcome Gene to the show.
Thanks so much, Farhad. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and before we get started, we'd love to know a little bit more about yourself. That I'm sure you have a long history, which I just heard a minute ago. Maybe start at 5 years old. So you want to start at 5 years old, or do you want to start at like early?
5-year-old works, and it's interesting because when I was 5, I started a business, or what I thought was a business at the time, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But I started by collecting newspapers at the time when there were actually people who got newspapers.
Yeah, there are newspapers back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so I went to all my neighbors and asked them if I could collect their newspapers. And they held them for me, and sometimes it would be a week or 2 weeks, and I'd get a big stack of newspapers, and I'd go with my little red wagon, and I'd get the newspapers from all my neighbors, and we'd bring them home, and then we'd take them to the dump, and we'd get recycling for them.
Yeah.
Well, about 3 or 4 months into that, I realized how much effort it was to go and get these newspapers. So I hired my friends, and at 5, nobody knows the value of money anyway. So I hired them for like 5 cents or 10 cents every week to go get the newspapers and bring them to me.
Wow. So you're already learning about scaling, right?
Exactly,
the start.
yeah.
Delegation and scaling.
So we'd take them to the dump still, and then I'd pay my friends, child labor wages.
That's great.
And that lasted a little while, but then I pretty much did the same thing at 9 years old with a car wash instead. So it's an interesting thing. I'm in business I have a business now, and I've had multiple businesses in the past, but I've also been an employee a lot because I was a police officer when I got out of college.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I love being a police officer, but things happen in life. And so I got injured and I got retired. And I already had a wife, I already had a baby, so I had to figure out what to do. So I decided, you know what, I'll go back to law school.
Wow.
Which I went back to law school, but then I realized law school doesn't pay very well. So I started a business, and I started a financial business doing real estate and mortgages.
Okay. So wide-ranging so far.
Yeah, I did quite a few things.
Yeah.
And so as a lawyer, I started to work for a big law firm.
Okay.
So I was the ultimate employee, working 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week for big law, and then still trying to keep my mortgage and real estate business going.
Yeah.
About 7 years into working in big law, I realized this is hell. So I decided it's time for me to get out.
Yeah.
So I started my own law firm, and I started my own law firm by first just taking some of the clients from the law firm that I was working at, and I was helping them. But again, I was spending 16, 17 hours a day doing law work for myself.
Right.
So I got a couple lawyers that I brought in with me and started paying them. And
hopefully not the 5 cents.
It was a little bit more than it was when I was 5. Because lawyers on an hourly make a decent amount of money.
Right, that's right.
But, things happen in business. And I had some clients about 3 years into my law firm. I had already paid my lawyers, but I had 2 businesses that within about 3 months of each other decided not to pay me about $500,000.
Wow.
Yeah, but I had already put that money out for the lawyers that who were doing the work for me.
Right.
And so, again, life has to change.
Wow.
And you realize different things. And I'm in the finance business now. I really primarily am in financial education and leadership development. And I love what I do. They say if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
That's right.
And so I love what I do. I get to get out there and really help people understand how money works, because it's not taught anywhere. It's not in high school. It's not in college. Our parents, most of the time, haven't received a financial education, so they can't pass it down to us.
That's right.
So I love what I do in terms of educating people and then figuring out what their needs are and really matching it.
That's such an interesting point, because I think like a lot of young people talk about how they go to college or the advanced education, but yet they don't know how to do their taxes, or they don't learn the basics of economics, or things that like you just need to operate in your life, but they know arbitrary facts about like certain things in education, but these things aren't taught. So it's great that you're creating this, service to educate, people, and I'm sure it's super fulfilling.
It is.
To do
it's
that
really
and, like,
fulfilling.
Giving people knowledge that they can use every day. So that's
great.
great.
And it's funny, we have people who they're economics majors, or they're coming out of business school, right? And they've got their MBA. And I sit down with them, and they have no idea how to deal with personal finances.
The book smarts and the street smarts and like the reality of like how the world works is so different.
Completely different.
That's
completely
great.
different. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. So it's really exciting to get to speak with you because I know, just like you explained, a lot of our partners in both BloomNation and Promenade, they need this help. They don't know how to do a lot of the things that they should be doing or things that they need to avoid. So it's a great opportunity to chat with you and get some insights from an expert. So I appreciate your time already in advance.
Well, thank you for letting me on here, and I appreciate having the conversation with you.
All right, great. Well, so now it's the new year. January just kicked off, and so a lot of business owners should already have a plan in place and goals set up. But for the people who don't, what's some advice? What should they be thinking about? How should they be prioritizing some goal settings or things that they should be trying to achieve this year?
Yeah, so that's a big question. And it's true for every business, regardless of whether you're a single operator or whether you have a multi-billion-dollar business.
Right.
And understanding the business plans and having something in effect and having detailed information and detailed goals for your business is absolutely critical. And understanding the difference between are you running a business or are you self-employed is a big deal. Most business owners, especially at the small business level, really believe that they're actually running a business. But in fact, they're really self-employed with some helpers.
Interesting.
And that's a big difference between the two.
Right.
If there's a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and he does a great job of explaining this, and he actually uses somebody who creates a bakery as an example.
Okay.
And the majority of people who have their own businesses get into business because they love a certain thing that they do. Whether that's flowers, whether that's a restaurant, whether it's whatever it is. They get involved in it because they love the idea of having a business, but also they love what they do, being a florist, right?
The craft of it. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the reality is that most of the time turns into a few-year plan where it just goes out of control and they're self-employed the whole time. Mm-hmm. So they get tired of the business of having to do flowers, for instance, or the business of running a restaurant.
Yeah. Right.
I've worked with so many restaurant owners, and the biggest thing is they become the chef or they become the head man or the general manager. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, it becomes very difficult because you just bought yourself a job.
Right.
So understanding the difference and having a business means that you can at any time pick yourself out and let the business run entirely on its own, and none of the economics of the business will change.
Interesting. And I've actually noticed that even within our platform, some of the most successful flower shops or restaurant owners, I think this is more true for flower shop owners, is that the ones that started off as like business-minded or they were business owners previously and they just happened to buy a flower shop have been able to run things much more efficiently and do kind of like what you're kind of talking about versus someone who's like, oh, I love flowers, I want to be a flower designer and then start a flower shop. Totally different mindsets, and they've taken different paths by just having a different mindset of like, what are they trying to achieve? So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's 100% different.
Yeah.
Because as a florist, and if you're somebody who wants to run a flower shop, then you're thinking about the flowers. You're not thinking about the business.
Right.
And the fact is that people who are in business, not people who are if you're working in your business versus on your business, right? They say that all the time.
Yeah.
For people who are working in their business, they don't have time to understand the actual business itself. They're working in their business. But when you have the opportunity to step out of that role and think of it from a business perspective, not a self-employed perspective, it gives you the opportunity to really be able to run anything at any time.
Right.
So you can buy a flower shop, or you can buy a restaurant, or you can buy it doesn't matter what the business is because you know how to run a business.
That's right. So it's, very much about like, are you trying to be a florist or are you trying to be a business owner? And those are two different mentalities, which
100%.
is interesting.
100%.
So then what are some of the challenges? I mean, like that in itself is a challenge. Like you need to zoom out. You kind of have to think of yourself as a business owner and look at things at a different vantage point. So how should small businesses, like especially flower shops, restaurants, be thinking about challenges that they may be facing this year? So your advice is kind of like you got to think like a business owner, zoom out, really like have a different mindset. But when you do have that mindset, what should you be expecting? Like I'm sure something they're going to discover is going to scare them. So what are some things that they should have a heads up on challenges that may face them?
So the number one thing is understanding their business. Not understanding how they work within their business, but how their business runs and what it needs to be able to move forward. Mm-hmm. The second most important thing then is to have that business plan, like we talked about. Common mistake for most people is they don't have a business plan in their business, which means specific, detailed things that they're trying to achieve, usually on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. And start backwards. What are you trying to achieve for the year? And then move backwards from there, quarterly, and then monthly, and then weekly, and then daily. In order to do that, they have to know their numbers. They have to know what's profit, how much do they need to make in order to be able to see a profit for themselves, not just for the business. Mm-hmm. Know exactly what the cost of doing business is. What are your costs of supplies? What are your costs of labor? Exactly what those numbers are.
All the not fun stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's the stuff that keeps you in business.
Right.
80% of all businesses, especially small businesses, go out of business within the first 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So why is that? Goes back to what we were talking about before. People aren't business owners. They're self-employed. Knowing your numbers is part of that business ownership mentality. Not only that, but you've got to then create savings. You've got to create savings in your business, which means you have to have an emergency fund within your business because your business is going to have times where it doesn't do as well. You also have to have an emergency fund for yourself, and you've got to have savings personally. Your business savings, your business emergency fund is not your personal savings. It's not your personal emergency fund. They have to be different.
And we see that a lot of times is flower shops will commingle their personal finances with their business finances, and they very muddy waters there. So you're saying clearly separate your finances and the way you think about even bad things that could happen, both personally and then separately for your business.
100%. And even if you're not necessarily separating the accounts, you have to be able to separate the money in your mind. You have to know what's your personal and what's your business, and exactly how much you have in your savings and your emergency fund. Because there are going to be times in your business where you're not doing as well. And more likely than not, there's going to be times in your business, just to keep it open, that you're going to be losing money. Because for florists, for instance, florists do extraordinarily well in February, better than any other time of the year, I would imagine.
Right.
Restaurants have different seasons that they do better than others. There might be a season where, right after Christmas is usually a season where you probably don't get as many people in the restaurant because they just spent all their money on presents.
Right.
And they recognize that.
Yeah.
Maybe the week after Christmas is still good because people are coming down and too tired to actually make food on their own. But once you get into the new year, the first part of the new year, people are really specific about their finances. And so those times of year where the restaurant has lower attendance, they're going to have times that they're still having to pay staff. They're still having to get supplies. They're still having to pay rent. And so their profits are lower. So they've got to have those cash management principles in place. And what that requires is savings and emergency fund.
Very interesting. And are there tools, I guess, how should a flower shop owner, say they want to start getting involved in this and they're ready to dive into the numbers and planning and thinking about how to have a fund for emergencies, but how can they keep track of it? Is there tools or software that you recommend that they use?
There's lots of software out there. It depends on what they want, what their accountant wants to use. I've typically had a lot of success personally with Quicken or QuickBooks, depending on the type of business that you're running. Those have been very good ones for me, but there's lots of options out there. The best place to talk about for purposes of your interaction with your bookkeeper or your accountant, find out what they prefer, and then use those to understand your numbers. Don't just use them to enter numbers.
I see.
When you're working with your bookkeeper, most people, especially in small businesses, they give their numbers to their bookkeeper, and that's the last time they see them.
Yeah, that's right.
Unfortunately, that's not the way business gets done. Business, you need to know all of your numbers. You need to have specifics to everything that you're doing. You need to know every category of your numbers. What's your profit? What's your costs? But it's not just those two, it's broken down within there.
Speaking of accountants, how much should you be leaning on an accountant or a bookkeeper to get some of that insight versus, like you said, you just send the numbers, hope you don't get in trouble with anything, and see you next year? Or should there be like a meeting where you're actually discussing and having, some thoughtfulness on how is the business doing? How should I be thinking about it? What's your advice? Like, should they be interacting more with accountants and bookkeepers? As much as I'm sure they're not wanting to, but...
Yeah, the fact is that nobody wants to actually look at their numbers.
Yeah.
That's the truth, unless they're making an awful lot of money. I have a client that I just worked with recently who he ended up making several $1 million last year personally after all of his expenses. Wow. But he didn't find out until December 12th. So we were running through a whole gamut of things in order to be able to figure out how do we get rid of an extra $3 million of income so he doesn't have to pay an extra $1.5 million in taxes.
That's a scramble.
Yeah. And especially when you're trying to do it in 20 days,
yeah, that's right.
It becomes a problem.
Yeah.
But that's very consistent with the way most businesses are. Most, especially small and medium businesses, they're trying to figure out at the end of the year or at an end of a period, what do I have to do? Whereas if they're in constant communication with their bookkeeper, if they know their numbers, they can't rely on their accountant to tell them how to run their business. They have to rely on the accountant and the bookkeeper only to give them the numbers so that they can run their business.
Interesting.
Because it's their business, it's not the accountant and the bookkeeper's business.
Yeah, good point.
And accountants and bookkeepers, they'll screw things up too. And that's okay. You have to be able to catch that, because it's still your business.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, like, going back to what you were saying about zooming out and being the business owner, should allow you to have the time to think about these things throughout the year, versus if you're just operating and you're in the weeds every single day, then it's a triage situation where December hits and you're like, oh no, now I have to think about my numbers. Then it's panic mode, right? And then that's when you're having that quick conversation with your accountant to check the box and move on.
Right.
But if you think like an owner, then you are consistently having the thoughtfulness to be like, okay, how's the business doing and what do I need to do, and be much more proactive, and there's no rush or panic towards the end of the year.
100%. And the other thing that's important is, especially small business owners, they try and be everything because they think, I can't afford an accountant, or I can't afford a bookkeeper, or I can't afford a financial professional to work with. And the reality is that they can't afford not to work with those people.
They don't know the true cost of not doing it. Yeah.
And the number of hours that they spend trying to figure out something that a professional would know immediately.
Right.
Trying to figure out taxes and how to do your taxes. Putting it into TurboTax or something like that is great, but there's an awful lot out there that accountants know that TurboTax doesn't necessarily take into consideration.
Interesting.
And I'll tell you, there's a huge difference between the wealthy and the people who are trying to get wealthy. And the people who are wealthy know a lot more how to use professionals to leverage even more money for themselves.
And that's a great point, because I think that starts allowing you to think about scale. Like you were mentioning the newspaper business. Like, I don't think you would have been able to scale that business if you hadn't thought about how to bring on more people to help you, grow your capabilities. So a lot of the people that are just owner operators in the weeds, they can't even think about scale. It's not even on their radar because they're so inundated with their day-to-day tasks. But on this path of doing all the right things, we're now zooming out, we're thinking about our business in the right way, we're having proactive conversations. This could then allow us, and we're delegating and we're hiring the people, this could open up the opportunity for scale, right? To grow the business, which is kind of what you want to do. I mean, some people are happy where they are with their business, but I'm sure everyone wants a little bit more money, right?
I'm sure everybody does.
Especially with the rising of cost and the challenges of the economy. Growing your business is pretty important, especially in 2024. So what are some things that a flower shop should be thinking about when it comes to okay, I'm ready to scale, I'm kind of going to follow the advice of Gene, now I want to scale, what are they should they be thinking about?
Sure. So scale is just a matter of understanding your numbers and understanding how can you make it most efficient. Efficiency is everything when you're talking about a business. And when I talk about efficiency, it's not necessarily slave driving your employees. That's not efficiency.
Right.
It's having everybody understand what their tasks are, how to do their tasks best, and the fact that you're not an employee of your business. And those pieces, when you can put structure into place, then you can scale. But if you don't have structure, you can't scale to begin with because you don't know how the next person coming in is going to be able to fit into the already created cogs of your business, right? That structure has to be there. And more importantly, you're going to have people leave from your business to do other things. If you don't have that structure there, you have a new person come in, where are you going to put them? What do you have to teach them? What do they need to know in order to be able to take over for the person who left? If you can't duplicate every piece of your business, then you don't have a business.
Interesting. And so when you think about the hardest thing, at least the way I, envisioning it is like pulling yourself out. Like you said, you can't be an employee of your own business anymore. I'm sure that's probably the toughest thing for a small business owner to do, because some of it might be guilt, like I'm not helping, I'm not being hands-on and I'm not participating. Some of it is just like, that's the stuff that feels good. I enjoy the craft. I want to be, if you're a flower shop owner, I want to do some of the design work, and there's an enjoyment there, right? And then some of it is, like you said, it's just too expensive, quote unquote, too expensive for me not to do it. Right. So there's a lot of difficulty around removing yourself. But I'm sure there's one area where someone would not want to be involved in, and that's like the tax planning and the compliance. And like, even as a business owner for BloomNation and Promenade, I love handing that off to my CFO, COO. I don't want to get too involved in those things. What are your advice for people around, if you're scaling your business, you're doing all these things, and then you have to deal with all this like really not fun things like tax compliance, regulation stuff, and like all that? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So the fact is, you have to deal with that stuff if you're a business owner, period.
Yeah.
You're either going to avoid it, which is going to get you in more trouble, or you're going to deal with it, which is going to allow you to build your business and scale your business.
Right.
So it's not that it just simply goes away if you ignore it. Using professionals in the capacity that they need to be used in is the least efficient, as the least costly way to actually make it happen.
Interesting. Okay.
Because if you try and do it yourself, then again, you're going to take work from your business, time from your business, and you running your business. If you're running it as a self-employed business owner right now, then you're going to take time away from you being able to do those things that are going to make you money. If you're running it as a true business, you're going to take away time from you being able to review your business numbers, grow your business, scale your business. So either way, you're going to be taking time and the ability to make more money away by not using people to leverage their knowledge to benefit you. If you avoid it, eventually you're just going to go out of business one way or another.
Right.
Either you're going to go out of business because you haven't complied, or you're going to go out of business because you have too many taxes to pay and you can't afford to run your business anymore, whatever it is.
I'm sure that's that 5-year marker comes from.
It's
a lot
part
of
of
people.
it.
Yeah.
It's part of it. And that leads into another point, and that is you have to understand your personal finances. The emergency fund is important. The savings is important. But you have to even do more than that. When you think about your income as a business owner, you really need to think about the first 30% of your income not as income.
Oh, wow.
That needs to be your taxes. That needs to be your savings. That needs to be your emergency fund. And if you don't think that way, you're going to go out of business, period.
Wow.
Because you're not going to be able to sustain those times where business goes down.
Inevitably, it's going to go up and down, and you can't ignore the fact that that's going to happen. So that's great. So right off the top, just cut that 30% out. Don't even imagine you didn't receive it.
That's right. If you bring in 100,000 of gross receipts or 100,000 of net receipts, then you really only made $70,000. The biggest problem for small business owners is they think, I made $100,000. And then the next thing is they live on $100,000 of income. They don't live on $70,000 of income, which doesn't allow them to create that savings, the emergency fund, the investments, creating a future for retirement, all kinds of different things.
So they don't even realize, but they're living on the edge by just accounting for the $100,000 versus cutting it out down to 70 and then riding those waves, not having to feel the effects of the ups and downs.
And unfortunately, we're taught in our society to spend money and then save whatever's left. And the fact is that when you spend first and save whatever is left, we can find a way to spend. We're a consumer-based society.
That's right, yes.
So, you spend first, you say, okay, I'm going to save $1,000 at the end of every month. Well, then the house needs something done. You need a new car. This month I need a new couch.
So easy to find excuses, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's go out to dinner a little bit more because we're doing okay. Yeah. And in most cases, you end up with more month than you do money.
Right.
But if you change your mindset and you think we got to save first and then spend whatever's left, it completely changes your approach. And really, that's the only way to create a financial future.
You become a lot more resourceful when you know you have a limited amount of, whether it's money or time or resources, whatever it may be. But you're right, when you start off with knowing you have a finite amount and this is all you can work with, you change your mindset. That's great.
And in today's world, there's a lot of keeping up with the Joneses.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're talking about keeping up with the Joneses, every time you move up income, if you're at $50,000 and all of a sudden you move up to $70,000, you don't decide to put an extra $20,000 away for the most part. The majority of people then say, okay, well, now I need a better car. I need a little bit better apartment. Unless
you earned it. You're like, okay, I've been working hard. I want these things.
Well, and you think about who your associations are.
Yeah.
And if your associations are improving, and I'm saying that from a financial perspective, right? If the people that you're hanging out with likely have more money because that's your associations when you start making more money, you think, okay, they have X, Y, and Z, so I should be able to have X, Y, and Z. I have a client that was making over $1 million a year, and he had nothing saved. He was spending $1.1 million every year because his associations were spending $1.1 million every year, or at least he thought they were.
Right.
It looked like they were.
Yes, the perception was there.
That's right.
And if you ask someone who's making $100,000 saying if you had $1 million, I'm sure they would think, oh, I have so much money to save up and do all the right things. But it's a slippery slope. As soon as you're starting a little bit more money, it's so easy to, like you said, to start thinking about reasons how to spend it, burning a hole in your pocket.
And unfortunately, that's what we're taught. Look at the things that we see on TV. Look at the things that we see in magazines.
Yeah.
It's not about, let's put a lot of money away. It's about, here's a great watch. Look at my cars. You look at Instagram now.
Yeah. Trouble.
Every time you flip through Instagram, you see somebody sitting there on the road with a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Or, their jet plane or whatever it is. And the fact is that those are images. It's not real. And even if that person did that, it's not real to you. It's not your life.
Right.
And unfortunately, most of the people who are buying those things, 5 years from now, they don't have any money because they weren't saving.
That's right.
They were spending and spending and spending. So get your financial foundation set first and then live off the remainder.
That's great. That's great advice. Well, so we know Instagram is not real, but one thing that is real is inflation and labor shortages. And there's a lot of challenges in the economy that have been happening over the last couple of years, but haven't gone away. And so it's a real struggle for a business owner, whether you're a flower shop owner, and especially I would say in the restaurant industry. There's a ton of challenges there around labor and costs are rising, COGS. How should we be thinking about it if you're a business owner? And again, now we're talking about getting into the numbers and understanding your business. It's never been more important because everything's gotten more expensive. So you can't sweep it under the rug as easily as you could maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. How should whether you're a flower shop or a restaurant owner, how should you be thinking about these really serious situations around the economy?
So the bottom line is you have to make some decisions. If your cost of labor is going up, if your cost of supplies are going up, you don't have a lot of options. You're probably going to have to raise prices unless you create more efficiency. So I was talking to a restaurant owner recently, and they were talking about the cost of the new delivery services and the percentage that gets charged for those delivery services. Well, that's a huge percentage. So you have certain options if you're getting charged a huge percentage of your gross receipts to go out to these delivery companies. And yes, they're bringing you leads, essentially, the equivalent of a lead.
Right.
They're bringing you a customer. But there's a cost to that customer. So first, you need to know what the cost of every customer is. And then second, create efficiencies within your business to try and reduce the true cost of that service. So for instance, if you're a restaurant and you've got a kitchen that's cooking all your food, can you create more food and more cooking within that kitchen? Is there downtime? Is there down space? Do you need to add another person in the kitchen to allow that kitchen to be able to make 2x, 3x, 4x the benefit? So efficiencies are really important.
And do you find that when these small business owners are thinking about their cost of goods sold, is that something that they need to analyze? Like we talk about software and like what tools to use. Are they talking to their accountants about this? Are they analyzing? Like, say they don't know exactly how much they should be raising their prices. They know prices have risen. You know, it's a big struggle because I know, like, to their community, they don't want to increase their prices. Right? They don't want to hurt their customers. And so we have a lot of flower shops that say, like, it's hard for me to raise prices. I don't want my customers to be paying more. They already have their own troubles. How much of it is like emotional, or is it just become like a numbers thing where you say, look, if your cost of goods sold are up 20%, you got to increase your cost 20%? Or is it more art than science? Is it purely just a numbers-driven thing? Obviously, there's a human factor, emotional stuff. So any thoughts around that?
Sure. So the first thing is the number one rule in business is to stay in business. You can't help your customers. Yeah. You can't keep down the cost of their flowers if you're out of business.
Right. Put your oxygen mask on first before you help anyone else. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it may be that you're going to sell a few less flowers, but your increase in your margin is going to be higher. Now, that's not saying that every flower shop should do that. You have to understand what your market looks like. You have to understand what are other flower shops charging for the same thing. Right. Understanding your competition is clearly important. But again, you have to stay in business in order to be a business. And if the costs of goods sold are going up by 20% and you have a 20% margin, that means you have no income.
Yeah, it's gone.
So you have to do something to mitigate that. Some business owners say, okay, I'll take less profit. Well, if you had $70,000 a year you were bringing in, or if you had $150,000 a year that you were bringing in after all of your expenses, all of your taxes, all of your savings, everything else, and now you just decrease that, you might decrease it by 20%. What's that look like in your life? And I'll tell you, most business owners, unfortunately, still live at a $150,000 level, right, but they decrease their prices and their eventual personal income by 20%. Now you're down at $120,000 instead of $150,000, right, but you're still living a $150,000 lifestyle because husband or wife got used to it.
Right.
Kids are used to it.
Yeah.
You're used to it. You already have the mortgage. You already have the car note, whatever it is that you have to pay. And you're not going to reduce your expenses by 20% of your income in most cases. So you have to find a way to account for that.
And this goes back to you also saying, remember, like taking 30% off the top. This is kind of the moments where you can like ride those things out and say, yeah, if you want to take a little bit less profit this year, you'll be okay because you've been living on 70%, strategy versus like if, you're running at the 100%, then you're going to feel these things, these fluctuations really, it's going to be a rough ride for you. So it goes back to, again, like you said, plan ahead and think about how to just off the top take that 30% so you can ride these waves and not get hurt. Ultimately.
Very true. Very true.
Great.
The other thing that's really important is business owners don't want to be business owners forever.
Interesting.
Most business owners want to be business owners and they think, okay, I'm going to go be a business owner and then I'm going to make all this money and then eventually I'll be financially independent.
Right.
Financial independence, you have to think about what that really means. And the idea of financial independence is, do I have enough saved so that I can live on whatever the interest or the income is from that money without having to work? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of business owners put all of their belief in the fact that eventually they're going to be able to sell their business. Mm. But that goes back to, are you a business or are you self-employed?
Right.
Because if you're self-employed, then you don't have a business to sell. If you're a business, then you might have some benefit of selling that business, but it's important to start from when you start a business. There's a great book called The Exit Strategy, and understanding that you need to start your business with your exit plan in place.
Oh, interesting.
And then work backwards from there. Is it going to go to your kids? If it is, what happens if your kids don't want it? They might see you working your entire life as a restaurateur or as a florist, and then they're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. They'll go the opposite direction just to get as far as possible.
That's right. And there's so many business owners that I've talked to who they get their 25-year-old child, and they're like, oh, they're going to take it over. And then I talk to the 25-year-old child, and they're like, I want to have nothing to do with that business. And then we start having conversations about what is your exit plan.
You know, it's interesting. So that's really insightful for small business. I know for venture-backed companies, like for tech companies like ourselves, like venture capitalists, the first question they ask you is like, what's the exit? How much could this be worth ultimately? So it's always a common thing you hear for big companies. It's really cool to think that that's how a small or medium-sized business should be thinking as well. Like, what is your exit strategy and what's your plan? Which I've never thought of before, which is great. Very cool. So, what, like, as we wrap up, like, what are some common mistakes or some things like, whether you're a flower shop or a restaurant, they should have a heads up for? Like, what could go wrong, or what are things that they should be, keeping an eye on and trying to avoid throughout the year?
Yeah, well, cash flow is critical. So that's why it's so important to really have those numbers that we talked about with the business savings, the business emergency fund, the personal savings, the personal emergency fund. And having those things is not enough, because the fact is that things happen in life. Like I was talking about when I got injured as a police officer, my whole life had to change. I expected to be chief police when I came into the police department.
Right.
But 3 years in, I got hurt. I had to start a whole new path. Business owners can have that same issue. What happens if they get sick? What happens if they get disabled for some reason? Can they continue to run their business? Can they continue to be involved in their business? Are they protected in case something happens? Are they protected personally? A lot of businesses may have partners. Most partners are good at dealing with the other partner, but let's say something was to happen to one of those partners. How much do you want to be in partnership with your partner's spouse? And I can tell you, for lots of these, most people don't. Or do you want to be in partnership with your partner's child?
Right.
This is a situation that most people don't want to deal with.
Yeah, they don't even want to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So having certain pieces in place, partnership agreements, buy-sell strategies, those types of things are really important, especially when you have a partnership. Having things like life insurance, making sure that you have something that's going to cover you in case of a disability or long-term care. Mm-hmm. And this isn't necessarily just for people who are getting older. It can be for anybody at any age. One of the companies that I work with, their average age for using long-term care is actually 40 years old.
Wow.
Because things happen during life. Now, does that mean that they're going to be on long-term care forever? No. But during that period where you need it, do you have something that's going to help you take care of it? So there's so many things. Protection from the market, for instance. Yeah. Can you protect yourself from the ups and downs of the market? You can. There's different ways to be able to do that. Can you protect yourself from taxes? There are different ways to be able to do that. But people don't know unless they've been educated. And going back to what we talked about before, most people don't get any education in financial matters.
Right. So I feel like every topic here has its own depth, and we can speak for hours alone on some of the things. Even the last 30 seconds were so insightful on all the things that a business owner needs to dive into. I think the theme here is really about zooming out and looking at your business with a whole new perspective, a lot of it's uncomfortable, I'm sure, for these flower shop owners or restaurant owners to be able to use new muscles and think about their business in a whole new way. So we probably have to have you come here every week to better understand all these individual things. But if someone wants to reach out to you and get more insights, maybe some hand-holding and direct coaching and understanding their business, we'll throw up your information on the screen. Are you available for people to have interactions and conversations?
Absolutely. I love working with business owners. Small business owners, medium business owners are some of my favorite people to work with because they understand the idea of not wanting to be an employee, which is huge in my book, and they just need help.
Yeah, they need the plan. They need the blueprint.
That's right.
And so you help them with that blueprint to get them to where they want to be. Yeah, I think the desire is there. Like everyone wants all the things that you're describing, but when you don't know how to do it, it becomes really difficult, and then you just get caught up in the everyday, day-to-day work. So,
and the funniest thing is, people are too quote unquote busy, and the fact is that all that is making a decision that something else is more important than your own future.
That's right. Well said. Well, we appreciate you coming in. Wonderful session and chatting with you, and look forward to future conversations.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Great.